Hello and welcome. I am your host of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Author Karen E. Osborne. I have five novels out. The latest is Justice for Emerson. I am so glad that you're here. This is a space for readers and writers to come together and talk about books. So I have a wonderful writer friend who is back to see you guys again. This is the wonderful R. Lee Procter. And he always has so many books. So the last time you met him, he was talking about two books, Claude Monet Designs Yankee Stadium, a love story. I hope you read that one. And then he had a fun Christmas holiday romance that came out in December, and it was called Sanity Clause. Clever, right? He's very funny. You might have also remembered that Rich was a radio disc jockey, an advertising copywriter, a writer producer for cable television. So he's done so much and he's quite prolific. But today he's talking about a really inspiring book. And I think you will enjoy this conversation and that you will enjoy the book. So welcome back, Rich.
Oh, thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
So tell us about Prosperity, Pennsylvania.
This is a book I sort of collected string on for about 30 years. I became very interested in the idea of like why things change or don't change, and why society is the way it is, and how could we make things, what's the technology of making things better? So I really studied deeply everything from sort of civic how things working in civic organizations to sports teams to businesses. And I really settled on the idea of the importance. What the book's really about is the importance of context, or another way to put it, culture. It's the ideas that drive something that make it work. So the book is about I took the most downtrodden Rust Belt town in Pennsylvania. So a town, there are many of these where the mill moved out in the 1980s, and the town has descended into becoming a really desperate and despairing group of people who basically think nothing can be done, and they think it's hopeless, and the state has given up on them, the country's given up on them. And, what would turn that around? What would cause that to change? So, in the book, this kind of disgruntled Afghan war vet comes back, starts a coffee house, discovers how to be successful about doing that, which is to essentially select good people and then bring them into a community where they all perceive that their prosperity, their ability to make a living depends on, of being cheerful, doing a good job, keeping the place clean. They become part of
Customer
something.
service.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So in the book, the hero, whose name is Mike Davenport, discovers that one of his Afghan war buddies, who he grew up with, has killed himself with an overdose of opioid drugs. And he goes back to the town. He hasn't been there, and he works in Pittsburgh, which is only about 15 miles away, but he hasn't been back to the town for almost 20 years. And he discovers, to his shock and horror, the how the town has become so the main street is boarded up. There's trash everywhere. It's become kind of a nightmare place. And he gives the eulogy for his friend, and at the end of the eulogy, he says, there's nobody coming if you don't help yourself, And he said, if I had my way, I'd come in here, like, look around this place. There are tons of jobs that needed to be done. I put everybody back to work, and we get there, we clean up this place, and blah blah blah. So, and then he walks away, and a group of people come to him the next day in his coffee house and says, we want you to run for mayor." He's going, "Well, wait a minute, I don't want to be mayor of that place. Are you kidding?" And he sees, so he goes back, and there's an event, and he meets the guy as the real mayor, who's a complete hack. His idea of how to save the town is there's a guy that wants to build a casino where the old
Mm,
mill was. 300
mm.
jobs that are all minimum wage, and all the money gets shipped out of the town. And he gets angry about this. Okay, I'm going to run for mayor. And he he runs on the premise. He runs on his platform is, okay, this is a town of 10,000 people, 3,000 people unemployed. His platform is everybody who wants a job will get one. Everybody who needs a meal will have one.
Mm.
Everybody who needs to see a doctor will be able to do that. Now, and of course, his opponent says, "This is complete, utter pie in the sky. This is crazy. You're insane, blah, blah, blah." And the book is about how these people do this. They turn the community around. Everybody who wants a job gets one. Everybody who needs a meal gets one. And how they do this without, you know, intervention by big government in any way. They do it themselves. Um,
That's
the
powerful. That's amazing. So this story isn't like just pie in the sky though, right?
Right.
That this is, I mean,
Yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with us making up, totally making up stuff,
Sure, sure.
but this was based on some research you found you that you
Yes. The main discipline I brought to the book is that I will not invent anything and I won't posit that human nature changes. Suddenly, everybody becomes an
Mm,
optimist and we all start working
mm,
together. No,
mm.
this is the opposite of that. And so I said, I'm only got everything I'm going to propose is something that has happened somewhere else. The core idea of the book is something I stumbled on and became fascinated with and did a ton of research on, which is that in 1991, Cuba, Cuba in 1991 was getting $7 million a day in support from the Soviet Union, including all the oil they could use. Well, if you remember what happened, the Soviet Union stopped existing in one day, and Cuba went from getting $7 million a day to getting $0 a day.
Mm.
The government, i.e., Fidel Castro, had vapor lock, didn't know what to do, and didn't do anything. The people in Havana said to themselves properly, they said, if we don't do anything, we're going to starve to death. Not only is there nothing in the government markets, there's nothing on the black market. So they said, okay, what are we going to do? So they got together, they self organized. They said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take every piece of arable land and we're going to turn that into vegetable gardens. We're going to create a barter economy. So if you work an hour in the garden, you get a time dollar. You can then, if you have a child that needs to be looked after, you give that to a grandmother who can, look after your child. That person can take the time dollar to the farmer's market and pick up some of the fresh produce. Basically they figured out grow their own food, feed each other, figure out a way to keep the town together and moving. And this is if you wanted to, if the people who are watching this, if they want to discover more about this, Google Cuba, comma, special period. It's called the special period in Cuba. It lasted about 8 years. There are still farmers markets in Cuba that started with this. And what I became most interested in is the ancillary benefits of this. Okay, first of all, nobody starved to death. Everybody got enough food to
Mm,
eat, and they did
mm.
it by growing it themselves. But the two most interesting about it is number one, everybody became physically healthier. Why? Because
Wow.
everybody started eating produce that was coming directly out of the ground. They're eating fresh greens. Nobody can afford to buy junk, so they're not eating that. So they become physically healthier. But an even greater benefit that was the fact that everybody became emotionally healthier. By that, I mean less depression. Why? Because everybody is meeting new people in these gardens where they're working together. They're meeting together for communal meals where they're enjoying this produce. They organize parties on nights when, to celebrate what they're doing. And the social strata fell away because you're in a garden. Okay, in the garden, here's a lawyer, here's a car mechanic, here's, an accountant, but now they're all just growing vegetables. So I thought to myself, so in my book, one of the people in the town who lived in Cuba in the 1990s and says, well, if you want to put everybody back to work, well, let's just do this.
Exactly.
And I purposely created the town as being a really downtrodden place uh, because I thought, well, who's going to do this except people who are desperate? So they do. Everybody goes back to work, and all those benefits start accruing. Everybody starts getting healthier, and they get happier, and
So why make it fiction? Why not just write the story of, but you decided to turn this into a
yeah,
suspenseful story, not just a story, but a
right.
suspenseful story. So tell us what your thinking was there.
Okay, well, in the late 1970s, there was a wonderful book called Ecotopia by a guy named Ernest Collenbach. Ecotopia was about the plot of it was that sometime a couple of years earlier, Oregon and Washington and Northern California had left the country. They'd seceded and become their own ecologically sound communities. And a
Hmm.
reporter
Hmm.
was going to go in and report what they're doing. And, so it's about all the things that I'm sort of talking about. And I read an interview with Colin Beck, and he said, if I'd put this in a book, nobody would have read it. Nobody would care. But if I put it in a story where people can live these things and they can go through, have an emotional journey with the characters who are changing and being changed by the experience and are coming together and having relationships with one another, I thought the ideas would be much stickier. I'd have a chance
That's
to.
very smart. That makes perfect sense to me. And
Yeah,
so I read that you have something called an underbook that
underbook, yes.
goes with. Tell us what that is.
Okay, well, in my effort to try to be persuasive in promoting these ideas, I thought to myself, I'm going to have to prove that I wasn't making things up. So the underbook, in the actual text of the book, there are kind of footnotey things, or I actually have. The underbook is based on chapters. So in chapter 5, they talk about instituting the garden system. So in the underbook, it says chapter 5, here's my research. There's actually a really good video that's on YouTube about the special period in Cuba. So you can see these people talking about what they did. One of the funny premises of the book is that the Cuban fella who proposes this, makes his living by uh, going door to door and asking people if he can farm their front yards, that is, grow produce on their front yards. And so because he always wanted to own a farm, but he didn't have money to do it. So he said, I'm going to get these people to use their front yards. Now, where that came from, there's a book I have here. It's called The Urban Farmer. That's
Mm.
the guy who did that. I discovered this book, and he talks about how he did it. He didn't have money to have a farm, but he says so his deal is he goes to a person with a big front lawn and he says, I'm going to grow vegetables here. I'm going to take them to the farmer's market. I'm going to sell them. You get 20% of everything I grow. So these people are getting tons of fresh vegetables. This guy's growing vegetables and taking them to the farmer's market. This guy works like 30 hours a week and makes like $80,000 a year.
Wow.
So, it's the system anyway, so it's full of quirky,
Yeah, I've
weird
heard of
things.
community gardens. So my daughter lives in Brooklyn, and so she had a little plot
Yeah,
in a community garden that just gave you your own food. And here in Florida, where we work, we feed the unhoused and the hungry every week.
right, sure.
and they get, besides a hot meal and clothes and a shower and everything, they get fresh vegetables from the community garden. They get a bag of, peppers or tomatoes
Sure.
or things. But this is like on another whole other scale. This is
Yeah,
this is
this is
amazing.
blowing that out to
Yeah, that's wonderful.
and
So what do you hope? So now somebody is totally intrigued by this.
right.
What do you want your reader to think, to feel, possibly to do as a
Yeah.
result of reading this book? What's your
Well,
hope?
yeah, my hope is that when people read this book, they challenge their own ideas of what's possible. That is, they look at, I mean, as I'm reading this book, I always read about towns who are the people are despairing because they're living in a food desert. And every one of those
Mhm.
towns has a lot of, front lawns and public parks and those kind of things. There is absolutely nothing stopping them from doing the things that these people do in order to feed themselves. Um,
Yeah,
one,
yeah,
one of the, I mean, this is a book that is sort of can be embraced by both libertarians and socialists because the
yeah.
government isn't doing this any more than the government did it in Cuba. The people are getting together to do it. Somebody asked at one of the community meetings, "Well, isn't it socialism? What about it? Is communism?" He says, "No, no. Look, if you don't want to do this, that's okay with me.
Mhm.
All I want, if you want a job and you want to join our community meal." Then you can, earn time dollars and work and join and be part of it. If you don't, no problem, lay out. So it's,
Yeah, time dollars. I like that. Time dollars.
yeah.
That is really what a great time for this book to be
Oh, oh,
out.
yeah, I think so. Because I wanted people to think about I guess the main thing I want is for people to look at things the way they are and then look at what's underneath them, which is the
Mm.
ideas that, one of my favorite, like I talk about the importance of context. I always talk about John Kennedy in 1961. John Kennedy in 1961 says, we are going to the moon and we are going to go to the moon and take men to the moon and safely return them to Earth within 10 years. Instantly, the entire context of the discussion about space travel shifted. It went from being
Mm.
a cocktail party conversation among scientists to holy crap, we're doing this. How do we do it? That's it. That's how context can shift something. You
Yeah, the
know,
big idea, one of the things in my old profession is that you sell the why of things. Why?
yeah,
You're painting a picture of a different life, of a different way that things can be.
yes.
And then you tell the how of it, and then you tell the what of it. That's from Simon Sinek.
Yeah,
He
I
says
know
that
his
most
books
of
well.
the
Yeah.
time we start with what and then how, and we never get to the why. And so what I love
Yeah.
about this,
Start with why. I know that book well.
right, you're starting
That's it.
with why. And
That's
that's what
exactly
you're
this.
doing
What do we want and what are we willing to do to get it?
to get it.
And the people
Yeah.
in this town basically say, it's like we what we want to be able to feed ourselves, have work, have friends, experience the joy of life, and return the town to what it was when the mill was here, when everybody had a job. The place was prospering. The place would rock on a Friday and Saturday night. And, this guy's always saying, look, we made the steel that built the, ships that won World War II, and then
Mhm.
we built the New York skyline. And we're all sitting around saying we can't do this. Who are we?
Who
We are
are
people
we?
who
What's
can
wrong
do,
with us?
yeah, or what's happened to us, and how do we get back to who we really are, which is
Yeah.
people committed to community and the well-being of our neighbors.
Wow. That is so inspirational, Rich. This is such a wonderful, wonderful premise. I love it. I
Oh,
love,
thank you.
love, love it. It sounds so, so good. So we have a few minutes left because we
Okay.
do chat. So But I wondered if there was anything recently that you read. Well, you showed us one book that you read
Right,
that
right, right.
got you going here. But is there anything else that you could recommend to our audience?
Well, let's see. I right now I'm kind of on a, believe it or not, an F. Scott Fitzgerald jag because
Mm, mm.
I'm fooling around with a story that involves Fitzgerald, and it's kind of a funny book where a young woman in the mid 1930s who's working for a exploitation movie company. Fitzgerald needs money because, of course, his wife is in an asylum and his daughter's in a private school. And so he goes to work for this exploitation movie company under the name of Pat Hobby, and they have this amazing adventure where he redeems himself. You know, the thing I always wanted to happen to Fitzgerald, which is he finally finds happiness in Hollywood,
Happiness.
but he does it in a completely unlikely way. So right now I'm reading a book called West of Sunset by Stuart Onan. This is a bit obscure book, but it's
Cool,
like I find his life so interesting, not necessarily in a positive way, but I
but
just
interesting,
love his writing.
intriguing.
Yes,
Yeah,
at the level
yes,
of the
yes, yes.
sentence, he's just the best writer of all time.
Yeah. So how can folks find you? Where can they? Because I'm calling you Rich, but that's not the name you write under.
That's
And so tell the audience how they can find your website, how they can, of course, you can find his books any place that you buy books or borrow books, any place.
right.
Just, and if it's not on the shelf, ask for it. But how can they get to you?
Well, two things. First of all, they can send me a message. My email is drprocter at gmail.com. That's DRPROCTER at gmail.com. But the way I'd really like him to do is to go to, I have a Substack. The premise of it's called Welcome to Prosperity, Pennsylvania. And the premise of the Substack is that the characters in the book are writing essays on what's going on in the town, talking about the ideas of what it is, because there's a doctor who's talking about how they've got medical care for everybody. There's a chef who's talking about what it's like to get all this fresh produce and feed everybody. And then, of course, there's the gardening and there's the town cleanup. I mean, one of the things that the hero says is that the true miracle of Prosperity, Pennsylvania is that somebody bends over and picks up a piece of trash and puts it in a trash can. Because when that happens, what the person is saying is, this is my town and I'm going to keep it clean and nobody can come in here and dirty it up. When that happens, it's just nothing but a cascade of good things. So the Substack is Prosperity Pennsylvania, lowercase, all one word, uh, dot substack.com. So
All
that's where you find
right.
the Substack.
That's where you have to find him. Got to read the book, follow him on Substack, and be in touch with him. Be in
Yeah.
touch with him. And I am just so, it's always so fun when you come. I have to admit, you're
Oh
so
well,
inventive and
I am
creative. It's,
I am so
it's,
thrilled to be here, and you've got another book coming out soon here, and I've really enjoyed your books too. I mean, that's I'd recommend every single one of them.
thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have enjoyed it. And I hope that you will return next week to what are you reading? What are you writing? Thank you, everybody. And we hope you have a great, both Rich and I, hope you have a great week.
You
Bye.
bet.